The show takes place sort of in the late 70s, high school, and it's about the freaks and the geeks and what sort of happens to them in high school.
I remember my dad one day, he's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm writing this book about me in school." And he goes like, "Who wants to read a book about you in school?" Every movie I do, everything, you'll notice it's all about an underachiever, an underdog who doesn't know their place in the world and has no confidence. Like that to me is every movie I've ever done, because that's, I feel everybody is, and that's me still to this day.
Hello and welcome to The Great Creators. I'm 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐬, and this is where I have conversations with some of the most celebrated actors, musicians, and performers of our time about creativity. Paul Feig had a roller coaster of a career. He started out as a comic and then a character actor before creating the cult classic TV show Freaks and Geeks. Now, these days, Paul is probably best known as the director of female-led comedies like the Ghostbusters remake or Bridesmaids and Spy. In this episode of the show, Paul talks about how he based the main character of Freaks and Geeks on his own experiences in high school. He also explains why he chose to give up acting and how that decision helped him learn to tame his ego. He also shares the story of trying to make an Oscar-winning movie only to see it flop, and why he will never try to make another prestige film again. And he has a lot of lessons to share about how to create an environment where people feel free to experiment. So before we start the interview, this is what you need to know. Paul grew up in a suburb outside of Detroit. His dad owned an Army-Navy surplus store, and he hoped and expected that Paul would actually take the store over someday. Both of his parents were devout Christian Scientists, and when Paul was a kid, he embraced it too. Yeah,
I mean, I was pretty religious up until kind of my mid-teens. And then I really got into science. And once you're into science, it's really hard. It gets hard to kind of bring the two worlds together. And I was just such a science nut that I remember at one point when I was like 16 or whatever, my mom knew I was so into science. She was like, if you want to choose science over religion, that's okay with me. It's like, well, thank you. It's very sweet. But yeah, when whatever religion you grow up in becomes what you were indoctrinated to. And it's very hard to admit that you split with your parents' beliefs, at a certain point. But, but I had, the good things that came out of Christian Science, I will say, is that a non-reliance on just taking medicine every time you feel any ache and pain. So to this day, I'm still very I'll only take something if I really feel like I'm in, bad shape, because I'd rather be in touch with my body, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing most people know about Christian Science, unless they've spent time in Boston and read about Mary Baker Eddy. They know... The only thing they know is this thing about medicine. So you grew up. Yeah. Were your parents pretty strict about that? You did not go to doctors. You did not take medicine.
Yeah. No, we didn't do any of that. Yeah, and but when you're Christian Science, all it means is when the other kids find out, all you get is this. This is the conversation you have your entire childhood. All right. So if you broke your leg, what would you do? Okay. So if you had cancer, it's like, oh my God, please stop making me answer these questions. Talk to my parents. I don't know.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So you in Detroit at the time you grew up, this was, from everything I've read, you were pretty very close with your parents, right? You worked in the store and, you had a pretty strong relationship with them.
Yeah, no, I'm sort of an anomaly in comedy. I had a really healthy relationship with my parents, which at a certain point, in your late teens, early 20s, you deny. Everybody's complaining about their parents. Your other fellow comedians, you're like, oh yeah, mine were terrible too. And you're thinking no, actually were kind of wonderful and really supportive. Which is why I think my comedy doesn't lean towards being dark, because I think, you bring the darkness with you. And my mom was very goofy. She loved very goofy humor. And my dad loved jokes. He loved storytelling. He's a real raconteur. He can tell a long joke and really draw you into it, which I have no skill at whatsoever. I cannot tell a joke. I can't remember a joke to save my life, but I can be as goofy as my mother. So, and I like the goofy side.
And as a kid, from what I understand, you were really drawn to acting, right? I mean, there's a video of you, and anybody listening can find this on YouTube, and maybe you don't want me to, but you don't want them to, but it's a video of you doing a commercial for your dad's store.
Yes.
Wearing a Groucho Marx costume, and it's pretty good, actually. It's pretty funny.
Thank you.
And but this was what you kind of like. Were you a ham? Were you comfortable getting in front of people and performing and?
Oh, yeah. No, that's all I cared about was doing that. Ironically, I couldn't get up in front of my family and perform. Like, I hated that. Like, I was learning it. I took guitar lessons forever. I never got very good, but had guitars and all this stuff. And, but my grandmother was always, my mom was very sensitive. My dad was, pretty cool. And, my grandmother, like, get up and play us a song. It's like, oh my God, please don't make. So I get up and I just would kind of just half-ass it and kind of fall apart. And then she would always go like, for this, he needs a new guitar. That's because my mother just bought me some expensive guitar. But no, getting in front of strangers is total catnip for me. I loved it.
In terms of like how you were raised, right? I mean, religion was obviously really important, a fundamental part of your upbringing, but it doesn't sound like your parents were culturally conservative, because I read that you would listen to Lenny Bruce and watch Monty Python and all these things, right?
Yeah, no, my parents were very cool. I mean, my dad was a little more conservative. He would, he'd hear any rock music. Oh, for God's sakes, that terrible music. The repetition. That's what you always go on, like, oh, the repetition. Because like if that singer would repeat a lyric over and over again. But my mom loved everything. And like a real seminal moment for me was, I remember when I was, I don't think, probably 9 or 10 at the most. She came in and said, like, there's a new show coming on TV, and I think you should watch it because I've read a lot of great reviews on it, and it was All in the Family. She had me watching All in the Family, which became like one of the most influential shows in my career. And so she was cool that way. And she wanted me to be in show business. She would, I want to play guitar. Okay, we immediately get to guitar lessons. I want to tap dance. Okay, we're going to tap, so it was kind of great. So she really encouraged it. My dad went along with it, but the plan was always I was going to take over his store. And so I was like, okay, get that out of your system, and then you'll take over the store. And in my head, even as a kid, I was like, that's never happening. I have no interest in retail or that kind of thing. And I didn't. I never got it. So I went into showbiz.
This is a bit foreshadowing, because we're going to talk about Freaks and Geeks in a bit. But from everything I understand, that was kind of your experience, right? Like you were a tall kid who was also bullied. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very much so. Yeah, I was taller than all my bullies were half my size. But they were terrifying. They were absolutely terrifying because they were just tough, and they were these scrappy, dirty-faced kids who would come at me. And so it was, but I always say it's like a David and Goliath thing, because they picked the tallest kid. I was one of the tallest kids. I wasn't like a giant, but I was, almost 6 feet, pretty early on. Pardon me. And I just think they were like, yeah, we'll go after him because we know he won't fight back. He's the comedy guy. He's, the sensitive kid. When I was in grade school, I would cry at the drop of a hat, which was really embarrassing, but it would just happen. So, so I always kind of go like, okay, well, you're a really low rent rebel if you're, oh, we'll take that guy on. It's like, yeah, go take on the quarterback who will clearly kick your butt if you go after him.
How would you describe yourself as a teenager? Were you... were you a character? I mean, were you like one of the characters in Freaks and Geeks?
Yeah, I was Sam. I mean, Sam Weir is completely based on me. The irony is that when we were trying to cast the role, all the kids who were tall weren't as good as John Francis Daley, who came. It was this little tiny kid, at the time. He was like 13 years old, but he had the same vulnerability that I had. I was a little more together in the sense of like I was a comedy guy, so like I was like the entertaining guy. But the minute somebody came at me and like takes you on, it's such an undercut. It's why I have there's nothing I despise more in this world to this day than bullies. Like that's the only thing that will make me become a mean person, is like I see somebody being bullied, or I'm bullied myself, or I see bullies getting into power, I just lose my mind. And because you just deal with it, because it as a comedy person, that's the thing that kills you. It's like, one of the things, like the thing that could take you down is if you're being funny and somebody does this, they go, oh, you're not funny. And you're like, oh, what do I do? Because now they just literally took all my power away, because I can't tell you that I'm funny if you don't think I'm funny.
Did you get into theater in high school? Were you
Yeah.
in drama?
Oh, yeah. Very much into drama club. Also very deep into forensics.
Forensics?
Yeah. So people don't know that. They always go, what, did you do autopsies? It's like, no. Forensics was those speech contests. And
Yeah.
I loved it. And I excelled at it. I mean, I went all the way to like state competition and all that. And basically, if you don't know what it is, it's like there's different categories and there's a humorous category. So you would get like, what I did is there was a old Saturday Night Live sketch about Star Trek. And so I did it. And what you do is you do all the characters, and you kind of, each character has a different eye line that you do, and you do these dramatic, humorous readings of these, funny pieces. And I loved it because it was solo. I wanted to be a stand-up comedian back then, but with that you had material. You didn't write it. You knew it was funny. You knew it was proven that it was good. And so I was really into that. But yeah, definitely deep into drama club.
I don't know if this story is apocryphal or not, but from what I understand, you wanted to go. You really got interested in film. I know you were like a lot of kids. You particularly interested in like slapstick comedy. I think you.
Yeah.
I read that you were really into Marx Brothers and the film What's Up, Doc?
Yeah.
Which was filmed in San Francisco, from where I'm talking to you now.
Yep.
A great San Francisco film with Barbra Streisand.
Yeah.
And you decided that you wanted to see if you could work for a film studio, but you ended up getting an offer to be a tour guide.
Yes.
At Universal Studios.
Mm-hmm. Correct. I wanted to get into showbiz. I was in Michigan. I knew there was nothing there for me. So my dad said, I have a guy who's a manager out in Hollywood, and, maybe he can help. So he sent me a copy of Variety, which had this list of all the studios, which I called. All of them said, do you need actors? And they were like, no, we need accountants and lawyers. But the last one I called was Universal, said, we need tour guides. I was like, I'll do it, because I'd taken the tour when I was a kid and just thought it was, that was showbiz to me. Oh, I got the gig, got it. And so I did it for a summer. It was hilarious. When I got the gig, they were like, okay, we're going to hire you, but you have to sit outside in the sun for 2 weeks and get rid of all your acne. It's like, okay. So, it didn't go well. It didn't go away. I was just sunburned with acne. So that's basically what it was. But no, I did it for a summer, and it was really good because I tried to be I started doing stand-up when I was like 15 years old back in Detroit, but I was terrible at it because I had no kind of persona or no mic technique, if you will. But talking on a microphone to, a tour group for, every day for 12 hours, I found kind of my thing. At first, I started out like a DJ. I would go like, hey, everybody, welcome to the thing, and do this. And then kind of slowly went, okay, just talk like yourself. So it was valuable. And I felt like I was in the heart of showbiz. I mean, I literally thought, I'm going to make it now. I'm going to get discovered on the tour, which everybody thought, and no one ever got discovered on the tour.
And did you live by yourself in Los Angeles that summer?
No. I got a roommate I roomed with one of my fellow tour guides. Who lived out in North
your parents sent you out there. Basically, you were out there on your own.
Yeah, they let me go. I finished my first year of college and then went out for the summer.
And basically, I would assume you kind of caught the bug, right? Because you knew that you wanted to get into this business. You were in Detroit. You grew up in Detroit, but obviously, to get into the show business, you got to be in LA or New York.
Yeah.
And so you decided to go to USC, to film school.
Yeah.
Thinking that you would make films, or because you were still focused on being an actor, from what I understand, right?
Yeah, well,
this is like 1980.
There was a lot of stuff. Like, I got really obsessed when I was young with Woody Allen because, he was starring in and writing and producing his own stuff. And I'd seen, like, on the cover of Time magazine,
right,
Comedy Genius. It was like, as a kid, you're like, can you be a comedy genius? Can you is that possible? So I kind of, when that opportunity came up, I justified it by going, I'm going to go and learn how to be a better actor at film school, but then I can also work my way towards writing and directing and starring in my own movies. So that was kind of the impetus for it. But when I was in there, I really did fall in love with production, but I never got past wanting to be a performer. And so always saw it as being that. But I really got into writing because I was always into writing, even back in Detroit. And that was actually one of the reasons I went out to to California was I had a screenwriting class at Wayne State University, which, nobody in there was really very, very good, including myself. But to the teacher, she thought I was a genius because my stuff was, marginally better than everybody else. So she was like, you could have a career in screenwriting. You should really think about it. So that kind of gave me the confidence to go out and kind of fail miserably at the beginning at USC because I came in thinking I was so cool, and really, then I was among people who were truly talented, and I was just a goofy dude who wanted to do, comedy.
Tell me about this idea of like this sort of Woody Allen idea. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, that seems like a very clear kind of vision, right? That you saw in him this person who was writing, directing, and starring in these films that were brilliant and very funny. And that even once you finish film school, that remains sort of this vision that you had? Yeah, very much so. I mean, before I discovered his stuff, I just didn't think you could do that. Also, movies were weird to me because when you're living in Michigan, movies aren't necessarily movies to you. You know what I mean? They're not like showbiz. You're like, oh, I'm watching something that really happened, which makes me sound completely, delusional. But like Close Encounters was like, it blew me away. But my takeaway wasn't, I want to make a movie like that. It was like, I want to be Richard Dreyfuss and get taken away by aliens, So that's how I saw stuff, and with the Marx Brothers, like, I want to be Groucho Marx. Like, I want to be that funny in these situations. But it was really, the moment of truth for me is when I was at USC, as a tour guide at Universal. And a bunch of guys went to see the opening show of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And that's when I was sitting in the audience. Nobody had ever seen it before. I mean, other than test audience, I'm sure. And I've never seen an audience go more crazy. I mean, people were jumping out of their seats. They were screaming. They were laughing, going nuts. And that was the moment I went like, oh, that's what a filmmaker can do. Because I wasn't like, I go like, oh, I could be Indiana Jones. Like, no, I'm not cool like Harrison Ford. So, but then you go like, oh, I'm starting to see what they do. I see how they affect an audience, the things you can put on the screen to surprise people. And that's what sort of changed my focus around from just being like a guy who doesn't understand movies to going like, oh, if I could do that. It still had the element of with me in the lead, which took years to kind of get past that. And thank God I finally got past it in my mid to late 30s. And when you graduated, because from what I read, like you, just as an aside, and this is important, you met Judd Apatow, I think in like 1984. He was like 17, 18 years old. Mm-hmm. You just graduated. He was like already in the comedy scene in LA. Yeah. Well, I
mean, Judd was always the most grown up person I ever knew, and he was like 17 years old when I met him. I was in my, early 20s, and all my gang was, and he was kind of the kid that was hanging around with us at this, we had this house out in the back of the valley called the Ranch that we all hung out with after our shows, and we'd just stay up all night, play poker and stuff and laugh and joke. But he was booking a comedy club. He was working at Comic Relief. He, had already done all these interviews with famous comedians coming through Long Island when he was in high school. So yeah, he had that thing. His dad was in showbiz and his mom was too, actually. His dad was a lawyer in showbiz. So, the rest of us were just sort of like dreamers from the Midwest. And I always remember saying to guys like, you better be nice to Judd because like he's going to run the town someday, and he did.
It's amazing. Yeah. Just that kind of single-minded focus that he had. When you sort of started your career, right? 1984, you graduate. Did you start to do what presumably you have to do, which is just go to every audition that you could hear about, or find an agent and just go through that grind?
Yeah, I did it through stand-up, actually. That was my thing. I really wanted to be a famous stand-up because I figured I could parlay that. And something also, I just loved stand-up. I mean, Steve Martin was my hero growing up, and George Carlin and Lenny Bruce and all that. So I actually put all that time into breaking into the comedy clubs. So I would go out, the time there was a much more vibrant comedy club scene in LA because there were so many of them, because it was a real heyday. And so what you could do is every night you could drive around to 3 or 4 clubs that would have open mic nights and go and just put your name in, get up, do it, do your act, drive to the next place, go, get up, do it, And so I did that for 6 months, never took a day off, 7 days a week.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I was able to work up my kind of my act, my first act. And found my confidence and found kind of my voice. There's still people that, when you're starting out, you imitate. I imitated Richard Lewis a lot, and had like an Andy Kaufman kind of thing with characters I liked. So, you cherry pick, but then you do slowly start to find your voice. And over the 5 years that I did it professionally, that's where I was able to get an agent and a manager, because it was a good showcase. I mean, the late 80s was a real heyday for comics, 80s and 90s, because that's when like Carsey Warner was developed, was discovering people, like Roseanne getting her own show, and Brett Butler and those kind of people. So it was always kind of like in the back of your head, like, oh, maybe I'll get my own sitcom out of this. But I loved it. I really loved doing stand-up until I stopped loving it, and then I got out of it.
Well, at what point did you sort of say to yourself, this is not my future, as stand-up comedy is not where I'm going to make it. I need to pursue acting or something else.
When you're a stand-up, you're always working towards being a headliner. You start out as an opener, and then you graduate to being a middle act. So an opener does 10 minutes, and middle act does 20 to 30 minutes, and then the headliner comes out and does an hour. And so it's like, become a headliner. So I working to become a headliner. And what happens was, once I became a headliner, I just didn't like it. It wasn't fun, because when you're the opener or the middle, all the other comedians are there. They're watching you. You hear them laughing in the back. You're making them laugh. You come off stage. They're like, oh my God, that was great. And you have the support group. When you're the headliner, you get off stage, everybody's gone. Like they're at the restaurant. Oh yeah, they said to meet you after the restaurant, but they didn't see your act. They didn't see what you did. And it just, for some reason, I found it really depressing. And then the other part was, I would just start to get on stage and do an hour, and it would be like, suddenly I'd get up there and go like, oh man, I got to do this act for an hour. Like, because I wasn't that spontaneous. I kind of had, my act was pretty written and, and worked out. And I knew enough guys who I'd been working with who were headliners who were kind of miserable guys who would attack the audience and like were really, all they were doing is like trying to bed waitresses when they're out on the road and stuff. And I was just like, this doesn't appeal to me at all. And so I just kind of went, that's the future. And I don't think I want to do that. And so pivoted into just acting full time.
As you started to pursue your acting career, because it was really for a while, it was mainly bit parts, right? I mean, you would get a part here and a part there, and I think sort of one of the first kind of big shows you were on was a show with Tom Arnold in the early 90s.
The Jackie Thomas show.
Jackie Thomas show. Tell me a little bit about this period, because it would be a while. I mean, it would be a while until you would get bit parts here and there, and some parts in films. But what was that like? I mean, sort of living that life, moving from small part to small part to small part for a long time, for
15 years, really. I did it. Yeah, and actually I had for being a character actor, which is what I was, I had pretty good success, because I ended up on 5 different TV shows as a series regular. But, when you're a character actor, you're the 5th, 6th, 7th lead. You can always tell what your place is on the show when you do the promotional photo shoot, which you're always very excited about. Like, we're going to do the cast photos, all this. So, all right, everybody get in there. There you are all posing, doing all this crazy stuff. And then at one point they'll go, all right, if you could all split off to the side and just leave the 2 leads and then all the pictures. And that's the only pictures that ever went out in the world. And I would just stew. I would just my ego was so big that I would just like, I should be in there, and how dare they push me off to the side. So it was, it's a very powerless feeling when you are just an actor. That's why I have such love and respect and sympathy for all the actors I work with, because it's a tough road. I mean, everybody looks at it like, oh yeah, you just show up and you say lines. It's like getting the jobs is so hard, and you just sitting by the phone constantly. You're trying to, at least I was a stand-up. I could go out and kind of showcase, but most actors are kind of sitting by the phone waiting for it to ring, unless they're doing a play, and then good luck trying to get the casting director to come to your play. So it was a very powerless feeling. And the big moment for me was after 15 years, I finally, got to be a regular on Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which was a hit. And then I got written out after the first season. And that was the moment when I said, like, I have no control.
Yeah, I wonder about that, because, I mean, you get this role. You get a role in Sabrina the Teenage Witch. It's a big hit. I think was it a primetime show?
It was the Friday night, TGI Friday line night.
Friday night, or TGI Friday, right. And you're on this show. And you must be thinking, okay, finally, this is 1996. You must be thinking, finally, I'm on a hit show. This is going to be, 5-6 years of my life. And this is great.
Oh, yeah. It's what every actor dreams of, like I'm taken care of. I'm going to show up. They're going to cut my hair. They're going to give me clothes to wear. They're going to tell me what to say. No, it's great. But getting kind of kicked out of the nest in that way made me realize, even though it would have been great and fun, it was cutting me off from other stuff that I knew I probably should be doing, which was, I always had this feeling like, I think I'd be better behind the camera, because when I watch my fellow actors and when I work with my fellow directors and writers and all that, I was going, oh, I have ideas, and I think I know how to make that person better, and I think I know how to make the script better, and I think that story could be better, so, but it was just the fear of doing that, because I loved acting so much that I didn't want to give it up. But then my wife, at a certain point, she was kind of needling me about, you should, maybe try to get into directing, because she just saw, you see the future when you're out. You have these auditions and you're in your 30s, and you're going out up against people that you've seen on TV forever, like some famous people, and you're sitting there like going out for kind of a half-baked part on some crappy show, and you're like, is this my future? Just trying to get these roles. And so it really, I bailed.
Do you remember an experience you had where you did see like somebody who was famous or that you recognize auditioning for a role that you were auditioning for?
Oh, totally. No, it was one of my big moments was, 𝐤𝐸𝐿 McKeon's always been such a hero to me. Back then I only knew him, Lenny from, Laverne and Shirley, but he was always so funny. This is even before. No, it was after after Spinal Tap. So I knew him from that. He's a genius. And I went in for this audition for Mama's Family, which was kind of God bless him, like a kind of a second tier show. And there's 𝐤𝐸𝐿 McKeon sitting there. And I was just like, oh my God, like you can be that great and that famous. And here we are just like trying to get a job on this, again, I hate to put down any show, but it's not exactly the pinnacle of your career being on that show. And so I was just like, oh man, I can't do this.
You knew that was maybe that wasn't the right fit. I'm curious because you really begin to transition into writing in the late 90s, and of course we'll get to the show that kind of really made your name, Freaks and Geeks. But that must have been, even though you were interested in that and that seemed interesting to you, it must have been scary, right? Because you had put all of your eggs in this basket of acting and of building this career. And many people assume, I think, that, you're an actor, it's easy, you can make lots of money. But the majority of actors are working actors. They're freelancers. They're going from gig to gig to gig to gig, living on their paychecks.
Because, people look and, at the time, like, if you did a guest star on something, you get a few $1,000s for the week. Everybody's like, oh my God. But it's like, but you don't get those jobs very much, so you get like 4 of them a year. You're definitely below the poverty line as an actor. And so, so it's just very scary in that way. But I started not feeling satisfied. Like I was a regular on the show called Dirty Dancing. It was the first show I ever got to be a regular on. And for CBS, it was obviously, the TV version of the movie. And I remember just like the day before it premiered, just walking around going like, well, this is my last normal day, because once that show's on, I'm going to get mobbed and I'm going to be so famous and I can't go out in public. And of course it comes on and no one knows who you are. Nobody sees the show. And it was this sobering moment of like, oh, that's right. I guess I'm just a working stiff doing this. And the bloom, but I never lost the optimism that the next role would be the one that would make me famous, and it's really a terrible way to kind of look at a career of like, I want to be famous. It's a very kind of a social media way to look at things. But I think that was the only way I could gauge validation, is like, oh, if people love what I do and they all know it, then I'm really getting validated. But it was very unhealthy. It was not a good way to run your life.
What was the impetus that enabled you to take that psychological leap, to leave this career that you had spent the last 15 years trying to develop and basically saying, I gotta recalibrate. Because you were already in your late 30s at that point, and to say, I gotta start again.
Yeah, it was a number of things. It was, getting let go from Sabrina the Teenage Witch was a big shock, just because you're like, finally I got it. And you're like, wow, even I finally get it and I still have no control. Like I could be written out of the show. But then it was hard. I mean, I had, basically what happened, I'll tell you the shortest version of this. After I finished the first season of Sabrina the Teenage Witch, I had money stored up. I'd been working towards doing the movie that I was going to write, direct, and star. And I wrote this movie called Life Sold Separately.
And you financed this movie, right?
I had like a stock of like $35,000 in the bank from the show that I'd saved up that my wife and I were going to live off of. She had her own business, but that wasn't making a lot of money either. So I took all that money, sunk it into this movie on the break, going like, oh, I'll do this on the break, and then I'll come back next season to the show, and then I'm going to make the money back. And it was when I was in post-production on this movie that was very, very small. It took place in a field with 4 people in one day. I shot it in 6 days, but, it was a feature-length film. And right in the middle of post-production, they called me up and said, oh, we're not bringing you back to the show. And it was this panic, but it was also this thing of like, screw it, I'm getting out. And I also was feeling very confident because I just directed and had a good experience at it. But it really... You directed this film. Yeah, directed this film and starred in and everything.
It's called Life Sold Separately.
Yeah, exactly, which is, it's still nobody's ever seen it. It's in my house. But what happened was I just kind of like... I got to get out because I have no control. But I went into the worst year of my life, career-wise, because I had this movie. I couldn't sell it anywhere. People really liked it, but I couldn't get it in any film festivals because it was just too small. And it was this, but the biggest moment that happened that kicked me way out of the nest was during that time, I was still trying to get acting jobs. I still would get auditions. And I got an audition with John Landis they were going to do a TV version of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids or whatever. And so I went in, and when I sat down, and he's like Blues Brothers and Animal House, those he was a real hero in the comedy world. So I was, I sit down and he goes like, so I see you just directed a movie. It's like, yes. And so we had this like 15-minute like peer-to-peer in my head kind of talking about directing and the problems with directing and comedy, all this stuff. And I was like in heaven. And then he goes, as you would, he goes like, so you're going to read for us. And just the psychic kind of letdown of going, the power dynamic just dropped, and you're like, oh, that's right. I'm just here to try to get a job. And I had a terrible audition then because I was so thrown. And that was the moment I was like, you know what, screw it. I had much more fun talking on the level with a fellow director than I did trying to be an actor getting a job. And that buoyed me to get out of it. And then at the end of that year, that's when I wrote Freaks and Geeks as a spec script. And then everything changed.
Yeah, I mean, so you make this film, right? And that you finance and fund, Life Sold Separately, and you can't get it distributed. And you poured a year of your life and all of your money into this thing. And you're no longer on Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And I can't imagine how kind of scary that must have felt like, right? Because you've got no savings and you're not getting roles. But you start to write this script that would become Freaks and Geeks. And I should mention, you were just writing it for yourself. I mean, you did not approach any studios or production houses with a pitch. You just started writing an idea and writing before you even went to anybody with this idea.
I as we say in the business, I spec'd it, basically. But that's what I've always been doing. I mean, the thing is, I've always been writing. I started writing in high school, writing comedy sketches, all that. And then any of the TV shows I was a regular on, I would write an episode of it, just on spec as a sample just to give to the writers and see if they would do it. And they always really liked it and give me good notes. And then it was always, a lot of times like, oh, we might do this. And then the show would get canceled, and I would always just be writing movie scripts. So I was just writing constantly. That's all I ever did. So honestly, Freaks and Geeks was just like I was going out on the road with Life Sold Separately on this college tour where they flew me around the country and gave me a rental car. And I drove to these really unknown universities to show the movie. And I just went like, I got to be writing something when I'm out there. I'm going to lose my mind. And so that was right before I left. My friend Matt Reeves, who just directed The Batman, and amazing. He was partners with JJ. He was friends with J.J. Abrams back then, and still is. And he had just created the show Felicity, and he had us watch the pilot. And I was like, oh, because I've been trying to do movies the whole time, but I was like, oh, you know what? An hour-long TV show is kind of like a movie. And so that's why I was like, maybe I should write one of those. And that was, I was just kind of like, what do I write? And I'd been wanting to write a high school show based on my experiences, and went, oh, I'll just write this. And the first thing I came up with was the name Freaks and Geeks, because I was like, I want to make it about all the people that I knew and not about the cool kids and the jocks and all that. And the name Freaks and Geeks just popped into my head. And I was at a dinner with my wife the night before I left, and I go like, I want to write this thing about high school, the weirdos in high school, called Freaks and Geeks. And she was like, she held up her hand like for a high five. And she goes like, that's it, write that. That sounds great. And that's what I wrote. And I was out on the road driving around, just wrote this thing, and it just poured out of me. And then I sent it to Judd, who had a deal at DreamWorks, and he had seen my movie and really liked it, and had said, hey, if you ever have an idea for a TV show, I got this deal. And so I sent it to him, and then he loved it, and we sold it to NBC. So it was kind of crazy how fast it happened.
I'm curious. I mean, you write this script, and for people, I mean, it's now become kind of a cult classic and a widely beloved show. It only lasted one season, but when you had this idea, you reached back, because it's, for people who know the show, it takes place sort of in the late 70s, high school, and it's about the freaks and the geeks and what sort of happens to them in high school. This was, I mean, when you sat down to kind of write the script, how are you kind of mining the material? Were you just really digging deep into your own past and trying to recreate images, ideas, moments, scenes? Well,
years earlier, I had bought a IBM Selectric typewriter, because I love typewriters and I'm a good typist. And so I was like, so I got it home and I was like, what am I going to do? But I want to just write. And so I was like, well, I have all these funny stories that I always tell. Like I would always just tell these terrible stories from high school of these embarrassing things that happened to me that would always just get giant laughs. Like they were my most killer stories. And so I was like, maybe I'll just start writing those. So I just started writing chapters of a book that I was going to call School, and wrote like the dodgeball scene. I mean, all these things, bad dates, everything, and was having the greatest time writing it, and really like, oh, I'm going to write this, this book. I'll put this book out. People will love it. And I remember my dad one day, he's like, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm writing this book about me in school. And he goes like, who wants to read a book about you in school? And it was so soul crushing in its blatant honesty that I was like, yeah, he's right. So I just literally took all those chapters and put them in the bottom drawer of my desk. So when I had made the decision to write this show, I was like, well, pull those out, because those are my funny stories, and just kind of went through those and went like, oh, these stories could work in the context of the geek story. So I kind of knew exactly what I wanted for the geek story. Because when I was a freshman, I was the one who was in love with the head cheerleader. She didn't know who I was. I was just this weird, nerd. But I had made this master plan. I was going to ask her to the homecoming dance the day of the dance, and which was ridiculous. She's like, well, somebody asked me like weeks ago, but thank you so much. So I was kind of like, okay, that's the story. About I'm going to write my story, try not to get beat up by bullies, and being in love with this girl and trying to ask her out. But then I knew I wanted to do, and I was an only child growing up. But I was like, I can't do a show about an only child, but I'd always wanted to have an older sister. That was my dream in life. And so I went, well, this is my chance. I'll invent my older sister for this show. And so that's what I did. I always wanted to be like older than me and smart and super smart and really mature. But then I was like, well, what's the story? And that was, I remember I was in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania on a treadmill or whatever between gigs on this movie tour, and just came up with the idea, like, what if she asked, the challenged kid in the school in an act of defiance against the rest of the school? And that's kind of where it all kind of came from. That was like, oh, good, that's it. And because I wanted her to be kind of this rebel, and then that's really what happened with it.
The show is, sort of remarkable for so many things. I mean, I think it's been called one of the best TV shows of all time by like Time and Entertainment Weekly, nice. and even though it lasted just one season, in part because the ratings were low, people just didn't watch it. Oh no,
we were the bottom rated show on NBC. But this shows you how far network TV has fallen. We had a loyal audience of 7 million viewers a week, and we were the lowest rated show. 7 million viewers now would be, I mean, Game of Thrones, the new Game of Thrones, they went crazy, like, oh my God, so huge. It got like 10 million viewers, for that night. So, but yeah, it was enough to get canceled. So yeah, so we didn't have, when they canceled, we were upset, but I was always going like, we don't have any recourse. Like, we're the lowest rated show on TV, and we're not a cheap show either. So off we went.
But it really, I mean, it famously launched James Franco's career, Seth Rogen, Jason Segel. The cast was pretty remarkable. One of the things I read about what you did when you put the show together and when you got the cast together was you very kind of obsessively wrote this show Bible, which I guess described details of down to like what people should wear, how they should behave, how they sort of what the set should look like. Tell me about what that was. What was in there? What and why did you write
everything was in there. It was when I was when we were trying to make the deal for the show between my lawyer and agents and Netflix, DreamWorks. It just was taking up a while. And so I remember Judd just saying, like, you should just write up everything you want in the show, basically. And so that's when I just started writing this Bible, because I was really nervous that we were going to be looked at as being that 70s show, which had just come on, which was, very funny show, but it was a cartoon version of the 70s. And I really wanted this show to be authentic. I wanted to be real because, I grew up in the, it's based on my, my childhood. So I just wanted to make sure that all the departments didn't go towards cartoon, and just started writing these things. What is freak music? What is geek music? And there's just list songs like, this is a geek song, this is a freak song, this is actually a song that both freaks and geeks like, and then each character, like what they would wear, what they wouldn't wear. And then it just kept growing. So it turned out to be this like 75 plus page thing that then there was an addendum to, because the first Bible is actually, I think you can find it online. It's floating around all over the place. But there's an addendum that I actually think is even more interesting, because I was just doing like, when Lindsay wakes up in the morning, what is her day? Just kind of go moment by moment and getting really into the details about it. But yeah, it was really done to sort my brain out and for the department heads so they didn't screw stuff up. But then it just became this thing that over the years, so many writers come up to me and go like, oh my God, I read your Bible and I want to do one of those for my show. But I think it's a great idea. You should do it. If you go into a show and you don't know every single detail of that show, at least the trappings of it, then you don't have a handle on it. There's so many people that create shows kind of like, oh, here's an idea, and you sell the idea that's a good idea, but you're not necessarily, it's not part of who you are, and those are, I think, the shows that really resonate if somebody's really got a personal connection to it.
I mean, it's interesting because this idea, I think, applies universally. It's not just about, it's a brand Bible, yeah. Right? It's essentially, this is the cultural statement. This is what our culture is. Our show is this. I mean, it's the same in a business, mm-hmm. Right? Is that and it's interesting because I guess judging by the fact that people come up to you in the industry and say, I love this, I guess it doesn't happen that often.
No, I mean, everything good has to have a philosophy behind it. And so much stuff is just done because it's surface and you go like, oh, well, that's popular, so let's just do one of those. But it's honestly why I think there's so much better stuff these days, because that lesson has been learned a lot in the past of, a good friend of mine, Rob Cohen, always talks about, he calls it hot sauce, which is basically like, there was some show that got sold once called Hot Sauce. And he said, that's clearly a parking lot pitch where you're on your way to a pitch meeting. You're like, I don't know what to pitch. Hot sauce. I like hot sauce. Like, let's do a show about people that make hot sauce, and you go in and sell it because it sounds like it's got a funny title and all that. And then you get in the room and you're like, okay, I don't have any connection to this whatsoever. And so, I think you always are trying to, I know by me personally and most people working now, you go like, what is the story that has a connection to me that I have a take on that is unique to anybody else, and that's what's exciting about seeing things from a new voice. That's why I have this company, Powder Keg, where we're all about kind of finding new voices and letting them make a movie, make a short or whatever, to get that voice out there. Because what is more exciting than watching something where you go like, I would never think to do that voice. I would never write that voice. I don't understand where that came from, but this is so amazingly entertaining and so opening me up to new horizons. That's what's exciting, because I get tired of my voice and I get tired of a lot of the voices in Hollywood because, for so long it was the same voices over and over again.
After Freaks and Geeks was canceled, did you think, okay, this is fine. We had some success, and now I'm well on my way to, getting lots of work?
No, it was a weird time. My mom died a week before he got canceled, and it was completely unexpected. I mean, she was fine, so just like gone. So when we got canceled, it was kind of like I was so exhausted. I mean, that show was so hard to do because we treated every episode like it was a little independent movie. So I was just killing myself on the show, as was everybody else working on the show. But honestly, when we got canceled, there's a moment of like, oh, thank God, like I can't deal with anything else, But then immediately you sort of go like, oh my God, not only did I lose my mom, I basically lost this whole second family I had because these characters become very real to you, and had a lot of plans for the upcoming seasons and all that. So that was tough, but then it done so critically well that I became sort of I wouldn't say a hot property, but I became somebody that everybody wanted the next idea from. And I would go out and pitch these ideas, like, we want your voice, but then they would get your voice and go like, oh, but we don't want that. And it just became very hard to kind of sell the next thing. And then I sold something to Fox called Ludlow Residence, which is based on I grew up next to a family of 8 kids who were all my best friends growing up. And so
and most of them were girls, right?
Yeah, six of them were girls.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, I'll do this because I have a connection to it. They live next door to an only child and all that stuff. So sold it. But then as soon as we got into development, they kept trying to make it edgier and make it more like sexualized with like the older kid. Like I had this whole story that like the oldest kid gets a full ride scholarship to MIT, which I know they don't give out, but still on the show I did it. And he was afraid to leave because he didn't want to leave his family. And they just, to them, the Fox regime at that time, they would just like kryptonite to them. They're like, oh, he's like a mama's boy. You can't do that. So then they pitched me like, what if instead he's working at his dad's store and there's this hot divorcee who's working there and he starts sleeping with her. And so he's like, I don't want to leave because I finally am having sex with this woman. I'm just like, are you guys kidding? If you watch anything that I did in Freaks and Geeks, what would make you think I would write that storyline? And so that kind of cratered and didn't happen. And then I really went into this really bad period where my name kind of got written out of Freaks and Geeks because Judd was on the ascent, and Judd, great. He's a good friend of mine, but it just, they only kind of look at the shiny object. And I was just this guy walking around trying to sell stuff who was directing television. And very luckily, I was directing like Arrested Development, that kind of stuff. But it was just a bad time for somebody, who was thought I had at least done the one thing that was going to at least make, give me cred in the business.
And so for a period of time, you kind of went, in a sense, I mean, you were writing and directing episodes of The Office and Arrested Development, including one of my favorite episodes of The Office, the home tour, which
dinner party
wrote, which is just the dinner party. It's just unbelievable, that episode. So it's very difficult to watch because it's so funny. But it sounds like, in a sense, you were kind of back in that rhythm of that freelancer that you had been as an actor, right? Jumping from one thing to another thing. And I know you spent a few years writing a film which was not a comedy called I Am David. And that film did not do well.
That's putting it mildly. That film cratered.
It wasn't a comedy. It was about a kid who's looking for his mother in Eastern Europe, and
he grew up in a communist labor camp. Not a comedy.
And when it was not well received, because I think you poured a lot of time into it. This came out in 2003. Tell me about your sort of, I don't know, just your general kind of state of mind when that happened.
Well, that was a really weird, kind of dark time. I mean, again, I was lucky because I was directing on Arrested Development, and I remember the day that I Am David bombed so terribly. That day I was working with Martin Short, so it was kind of like, okay, so this is kind of cool. But it was devastating because honestly, the movie only took like a year to do, but then it was 2 years solid of trying to sell it because we did it through Walden Media, which had just started then, which went on to do Narnia and have great success with that kind of stuff. But at the time, they kind of had a deal. They didn't have a deal with anybody, actually. They did it independently. It was like a $7 million movie that we shot in Bulgaria. But we had a deal with Artisan. We finally got a deal with Artisan. We couldn't sell it anywhere. None of the studios wanted it. They thought it was too bleak and too, not commercial. Finally, Artisan was this company. They bought it And I was talking to the head of Artisan for 4 hours. Oh, we're going to do this, that. We love this movie, Oscar consideration, blah, 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 all this stuff. Oh my God, it's great. The next morning I pick up Variety. Artisan sold. And that guy was out. And then it went to Lionsgate. Well, the early days of Lionsgate, who just acquired it. It was part of, one of their, things they got in this fire sale that they did. They just didn't care about it. They were putting out horror movies and all that kind of thing. So they just kind of threw it out there, and it did just bombed horrendously. But it was devastating. I mean, it was really devastating. And I'll never forget, I was having a hard time. Like, they would do trailers for it, and they would try to make it look like it was a movie that it wasn't. They put in like music that wasn't from my movie and all this stuff, and put in this like adventure music and stuff. And, and I would kind of fight them on that, and they had no power at the time. But it was really the weekend it bombed. I was sitting in a bathtub in our house, and I got a call from the head of distribution of the company at the time, and he just yelled at me. He said, like, well, your movie bombed. And he's like, it was like he was taking me to task for it. And it was bad enough that you just felt so terrible. And he's like, oh my God. And I remember just sitting in that bathtub, just staring at the water for like an hour, going like, I just wasted like 3 years of my life with this movie nobody's ever going to see, But again, thank God I was working as a TV director. But that was the beginning of a very dark period, because I knew I was probably not going to get to do another movie after that.
Did you, it makes sense that you wanted to try something dramatic, and you had, that you'd been doing comedy, but it makes sense that you wanted to stretch yourself, right? And I think it's important, right? Because part of the creative process is trying to experiment with different things to grow in other areas. But did you kind of, I don't know, did you walk away from that saying to yourself, people think of me as a comedy guy, and maybe I should lean into that?
No, it was a bad decision. I'll tell you exactly the mental process on it, and it's not a very admirable one. I was given, this book was sent to me. Walden had been contacting me about wanting to do a movie with them, but they had these they were really into the idea of like doing high school adaptations of famous novels. They just done with those other movies that had come out. I can't think of their names right now, but I was kind of like not interested in that because I'd already done high school, so I was like, well, I've done that, and I'm very happy with what I did. And so when they sent me out of the blue this book, I Am David, kind of like, I don't know if you like this, but this book's really popular in Europe, with school kids. Okay. So I read it, but it's about, a kid who grows up in a communist labor camp who has to escape and work his way across Europe, and then he finds his mother. He doesn't realize he's going to find her. Well, because my mom had died, a year or two before that, it felt like a cathartic thing. I really connected with that story because there was something really wonderful about it. But then the not heroic part of this was, I remember kind of talking to my agent about it. He goes like, wow, if you did that, you'd be like Steve Zalian. He goes like, that's kind of like Oscar material. And so, of course, and now I just lecture everybody about this. If you make a movie trying to win an award, don't do it, because you're not going to please anybody. But I had it in my head, like, I'm going to do this prestige film. And I had a very emotional connection to it, definitely. But, I can't write anything unless I really feel it. But the decision to kind of, and I put little comedy moments in there. So I would always just kind of, in the test screenings, like wait for those moments, go, oh, did they laugh? Okay, they're going to laugh. But, I really did kind of say like, but I'm not going to make a comedy. And it just wasn't smart, because I personally don't like movies that don't have some kind of comedy in them. I don't mean I need to watch comedies. I just don't like when I watch a movie that's so deadly serious that it doesn't leave any room for humor or lightness or anything. Because I go like, I don't want to be in that situation in real life. And I don't think people work that way in real life. The tensest situation you're in, somebody's going to make a joke or try to lighten things up. So that's why, it was more kind of like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And now I've been reaffirmed why I shouldn't have done that. Stick with comedy and make your comedy emotional and dramatic, but make it comedy first.
You had what I love about your story is that it was not easy.
No.
Your path to ultimately being a successful director was very hard. And actually, probably at times you weren't sure whether you were going to make it
totally.
At all. Because you did a film called Unaccompanied Minors. It came out in 2006. Totally bombed.
Exactly. I call that movie.
And
that
this
movie's
is
called
after
Strike Two in my world too.
Right, Strike Two. And so, what was your assumption that? Because I know you really kind of started to do commercials for a while, TV commercials, and just you know, sort of jobs that you got here and there. Did you assume that you were kind of finished after that film came out, that maybe your career as a film director was not going to be revived?
That was the end. I mean, honestly, because I was up for doing the Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which I thought those books were hilarious. But I was like, okay, it's a kid's movie. Like, I can't get these other movies, but I can get a kid's movie. Come on. And I went through all the executives and they all, oh, we're doing this. And then got to the head of the studio who went like, no, we don't want him. And that was the moment when I was like, wow, I'm dead. I am in movie jail, because if I can't get a kid's movie, then forget it. And so I would walk around. Look, I never want to complain, because I was very lucky. I was working on The Office a lot of the time, and 30 Rock and Mad Men, all this stuff. So it was a great time for a TV director, but it's just not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be my goal was not to be a TV director, because I loved TV directing. And I was actually lucky, since I had Freaks and Geeks, they looked at me as more than just a hired hand. They, would invite me to the writer's room and all that. But at the same time, you're just in service of the show, and you're in service of the showrunners, right. And so I would walk around my neighborhood and for my health walks in the morning, and the thing that always play in my head is like, well, I'm just running down the clock. I just would say that to myself all the time. You just run down the clock. It's fine. You're making enough money to get by, and and it's a pretty prestigious to be on these great shows. But I just hated that feeling of like, I guess this is it. And so when I finally broke out of that, it was just, I've never been happier. And the only thing that drives me now, other than wanting to do great stuff and entertain audiences, is trying to stay back out of movies, like the fear of getting thrown out of the business again, because you just, when it happens to you, it's chilling, and if you love what you do, that's, the worst thing that can happen to you.
I actually think fear is a really important motivator. I don't think enough people appreciate it, because, and I think people who didn't grow up with a lot often have that parts of that fear more so, because it's not sort of having that uncertainty can be really, it can be crippling. And so, because you're now approaching your mid-40s at the time. You were sort of watching a lot of your peers kind of get to a place where they could have control over their careers. And it was, I'm imagining it was probably a little scary. And I say this only because we know that the end of the story is totally different. Now you have a lot of control over your career, and have had many hits. But I know that you had this opportunity to direct Bridesmaids, and from what I understand at the time, you were in New York. You were shooting commercials. You even shot a commercial with Donald Trump for like Macy's or something.
Yeah.
Was that a low point? Not Donald Trump necessarily. Maybe it was too, but just doing commercials.
Yeah, it really was, because again, I don't want to ever say anything that makes anybody feel bad about their career, or because it is a great job if you do it, and some people are so awesome at it. It just for me, it was just like I was just looking for jobs, so they're just kind of coming up. But the weird thing was, because you were saying how, the people around me were, kind of found their thing and were doing their thing. But I was also surrounded by other people who didn't and really had hit the rocks.
Yes.
And those are the things where you're like, oh, am I going that direction? And that's what's the most sobering, to go like, wow, some people made it and some people didn't, and the majority didn't. And you go, am I just another casualty of this business and of this dream that I had since I was 5 years old? Did it lead me down the garden path? But I agree with you that fear is. I'm afraid to not be afraid, because I've seen it happen when you get so confident that you're like, oh, I'm fine. Then, set your clock for the end of your career. I always, my statement I always say about people in comedy is when they go like, don't tell me what's funny, I know. I'm like, man, you are literally going to be out of the business next year, because if you're not listening to people and you're not listening to audiences and listening to younger people and just getting a lot of opinions and just going like, I'm the king of, funny, it just doesn't work. So, so you always got to be afraid.
Yeah, as somebody who is in my is approaching 50 and have had a career of ups and downs and ups and downs. I think all careers are filled with ups and downs. I'm attracted to stories where people really break through in sort of middle to sort of the middle part of their career, right? And I think for you, your Freaks and Geeks was reevaluated later. I mean, you could say that was a breakthrough, but at the time it wasn't because it was canceled after a season. Now, of course, everyone says, oh my gosh, Freaks and Geeks, it was amazing. But at the time, that didn't benefit you in any way. You didn't sort of get to bask in the glow of that. And it was really Bridesmaids. I mean, you were in your late 40s and you had a chance to take on this picture to be the director. First of all, what was your confidence level like at the time? I mean, you had 2 strikes against you. Were you nervous about this being strike 3 potentially?
Oh yeah, I always referred to it as strike 3 when I was making the movie. That was kind of my code name for the movie. But that said, I was pretty confident about the movie just because, we had this great script that we were just, making better and better all the time. We got this great cast. And it was just so much fun to do. So doing it, you were kind of like, this is awesome. But I had been through enough stuff in my career because we felt that way in Freaks and Geeks and we felt that way in, Unaccompanied Minors, and I'm David to go, okay, we just don't know, like we can think everything's great, but we just don't know if it's going to connect with people. So, so that was terrifying. And then I had a lot of female writer friends who were inspired by us, who were out trying to pitch their movies, kind of female-led movies. And all the executives were going like, well, we have to wait and see how Bridesmaids does. So then all this extra pressure was on of like, okay, so am I going to kill movies for women if this movie doesn't work? So it was really scary all the way up until the day of release when I got a call. We'd been told the movie had to make $20 million opening weekend or it was going to be a bomb. And I got a call Friday morning after the midnight, screenings they did that didn't go well. And they're like, it's going to be a $13 million weekend. And I was just like, oh, fuck, another bomb. Here, strike 3 happens. But then throughout the day, it just kept building and building. And then it turned out to be a hit. And that was one of the greatest days of my life of just like, finally, I didn't lose people money.
And this really was a huge turning point, I think, also in your career. And again, happening, not when you were 20, 25, but closer to 50, which is you really become a director who pivots towards working with female leads, female comedic actors, focusing on strong female roles. Yeah.
I mean, it's all I ever wanted to do. Honestly, the only reason there's a male lead character in Freaks and Geeks is because it was me. But if you look, he's a pretty not macho guy. My favorite character was Lindsay, on that show. And so I just always wanted to just do movies with women. I just didn't. We all grow up watching movies about men and heroes and all that, and I enjoy those movies, but I didn't relate to them necessarily unless it was like Close Encounters with this, nerdy guy who wants to go off into outer space. So it was the success of Bridesmaids, which was one of the reasons why I wanted to do Bridesmaids in the first place. It was like, oh my God, I can finally do this movie with all these women. How great that will be. That it was just the greatest thing come out of it. Like I got validated as the person who could do that. So I could continue doing that because, a lot of people would go in, especially at the time back then, and pitch a movie with a, woman in the lead. And they'd be like, oh, it's going to be a man because we can't sell it internationally. All this, these ridiculous things that people just accept. And, so fortunately, at least I got to do it. And so I love it. I mean, it's my favorite thing in the world to work with actresses and to tell female friendship stories. I mean, if you look at all my movies, every one of my movies is a female friendship story because it's a theme I just enjoy because all my friends growing up were girls and I was always just loved their friendships. I thought were so strong and interesting and so multi-leveled that I've sort of never lost my obsession with that.
Tell me a little bit, walk me through your process and how you interact. Well, let's talk about Bridesmaids, how you interact with. You're working with some of the most brilliant comedic actors in history: Melissa McCarthy, Maya Rudolph, Kristen Wiig. Mm-hmm. How do you sort of see your role as a director? What is your role to make that movie great? How do you approach it? Well,
I approach it first and foremost. I want to create a safe environment where people can feel that they can try anything and not be struck down. Because when I was an actor, sometimes, I always like to improv or ad lib or to throw in a joke, unexpected thing. And sometimes you work with a director, be like, what are you doing? Like they would slap you down really hard. And then you just tense up and you can't do anything. So I was like, okay, I'm never doing that. So being an actor really helped because I knew all the things that are kryptonite to actors. And so just
essentially don't judge the actors, right? Let them try anything.
Well, don't make them self-aware. The minute they're self-censoring because they think you might get upset about something, then you're not getting the full genius that person has inside them. And so then it's like, well, why'd you hire that person? Just hire somebody who's an actor who just recites the lines and doesn't bring anything extra to the party. As far as creativity in new lines or jokes or ad-libs or whatever it is. So creating that safe environment and then making sure that we have enough alternate material so that we're not just shooting the script because, the minute you go to your first test screening of a comedy, all the jokes you think are going to destroy, like 50% of them just bomb. You're like, wait, that was supposed to be hilarious, but just for some reason the audience didn't buy it. But if you've got other jokes and go, okay, slot that joke and let's try this one.
You can just replace it.
Totally. So, that's why we do, 8 or 9 test screenings over the course of, the months that we're putting it together to make sure that everything works in front of most audiences. But, but then it's just really creating a fun environment, safe environment, yes, but also a place where people can just kind of have fun, and there's some directors who want to create these tense sets where everybody's, they're yelling at people and everybody's, but I find I can't work in that environment. And I find anytime people tense up, then it's not fun. And I'd rather have something that the caterer come over and go, oh, I have an idea for a joke. Like, sure, if that's funny, let's try it, and so we just kind of shoot everything because, that's the other thing I'm always saying is like, if we don't shoot it, we don't have it. Like if we shoot it and it's terrible, we don't use it, and so that's why I love at the end of a take, we'll do, go on forever doing a ton of takes and different alts and stuff. And then we think, okay, we've mined the hell out of that. The actor suddenly go, oh, can I try one more? I have an idea. I love that because so many times that's the one because it's come out of all these experimentations and different permutations of the joke or the scene or whatever. Then you get some amazing bit of creativity. So yeah, it's really just keeping it loose. And the other thing I always say is I, as a comedy person, need to be confident enough to be not confident in my abilities. Meaning I can't be like, this is funny, trust me, do this, or do it this way. I don't know. Like it has so many times people will do a take and I'm like, oh God, in my head, I'm like, that was terrible. Like, why did they do it that way? And then I'll get it to where I wanted it to be. I'll get back to the editing room. The one I thought was terrible is actually the best one because it was the most real. It just wasn't what I had in my head, but who cares what I had in my head? The audience wants to see the thing that is good. And so you have to be cool enough to go like, okay, that's cool. I'm happy to use that. What I had in my head was not as good as that.
It's interesting because you worked under so many other directors, and it seems like you developed your sort of, because it's a leadership style, essentially. There's a director of the film, you are the leader, right? And you are kind of like the CEO of that thing. Well, I guess maybe the executive producers, but the director's the leader of the team there. And you can approach it in a number of ways, like a command control approach or a more sort of deliberate approach, which sounds like what you do, which is you're not totally confident in your own opinions. Nobody should be, by the way, because nobody's infallible. But at the same time, it sounds like you really, because you mentioned something earlier in this interview. You talked about how early in your career it would sting your ego when you weren't in those promo shots, right? But it sounds like over time you really had to kind of learn to subsume, like to push that ego away, right? That in order for you to be the kind of creative director and leader you wanted to be, you couldn't have that ego. That couldn't come into the picture.
Well, it transferred because what I love about directing is I'm in charge. I mean, look, there's still, you get notes from the studio or whatever, or depending on who your producers are, but I produce also, so I'm always equal with the producers. It's being the one who everybody looks to, who kind of has the last say generally on stuff. that satisfies the ego I had way more than being, on camera or whatever. And so
the center of attention.
Yeah, so I love it. I mean, it's catnip for me but also I'm not a megalomaniac. So it's just like I go, that part of me is satisfied. Now I can throw all my attention onto you guys and make you the best that you can be. And that's my favorite thing in the world. And, going back to what I said when I was an actor, I would always like watch other people's performances and kind of go, oh, if you just did this. But I never want to tell it was another actor, because there's nothing worse than that one actor telling another actor what to do when you're in the scene with them. But just that feeling of like, oh, if I could be behind the camera and not be in competition with them, I know exactly how to make them better. And so I love it. And when I'm directing, you basically sit behind a monitor and you're watching whatever you're doing on a screen. I say, I'm the audience. I'm literally sitting there as an audience member watching something. And when I go, like when I'm normally watching a movie, go, oh, I wish they would have done this. I go, oh, I can make that happen. So I go in and go like, hey, try this, and then you watch it and go, oh, that worked. Oh, and then it gives you another idea, and then they have an idea. And it's just exciting, because that's how it should be. It should be we're capturing lightning in a bottle, especially when you're doing comedy. And, that's why I don't rehearse or anything. It's just like, let's just get up and start doing it, because the first instinct might be the best instinct. And, once you have it, which I love. It's why I've never been drawn to doing theater per se, because like you just have to recreate the same thing over and over. And I love that when you get that one thing that you never got again, but for 1 second, it lined up. Somebody did something weird they didn't even think they were going to do. And you're like, we got it, and unless the film burns up, you've got it forever. And that's really exciting to me. That's my favorite part of it.
And it makes it a lot easier when in post-production, because you're not filtering through all this tape, right? All this film stock.
Yeah.
Film footage, but you like to have a lot of film. You like to have mountains of film to kind of put the puzzle together.
I mean,
after.
if you're doing a drama, I guess you can get away with it. If you're doing a comedy, and you don't get more than one take, good luck to you, my friend. Because you just don't know. And everything's different. And what the biggest thing you need when you're putting a movie together, this is what I always think, it's such BS when you see like a movie about a movie director and like, and cut, that's the one, circle it. And, oh, we got it. It's like, no, you never know. Every time I've gone, we got it, I never use that take. It's always the worst take for some reason in the editing room. Just because you're getting what you thought you wanted in your head. But, my editor and I always talk about, does it add up? How's it going to add up? And that's the thing. You could every day, like my movies, people love our dailies. We just get great dailies. Like the studio is always happy, because the dailies come in, they're fun, they're always really good and all that stuff. But sometimes we string it together and our first test screening is a disaster, and you go like, because it just didn't add up. The math isn't there, because what's funny moment to moment when it's strung together and it's going for 2 hours, that's a whole different beast. And suddenly what was funny, if you go through a whole bunch of other stuff before it and you get to the thing that was funny, and then you go like, oh my God, I hate these people. And this is so not funny. And, so that's why if you don't have material with levels, what I do, my key to what I do is, since I don't rehearse, I go like, let's just start shooting. So we start it. And so what they're doing first is just their, raw, what was in their head, how they saw the role. I then have a completely different version, or a different version in my head of what they did. So I go and give one kind of small direction. They'll do the next take. Then I give another small direction, working my way towards what I think I want. But by doing that, I've now got all these levels of performance that then I can go back and go, we need a little smaller one here. We need something less here. We need something bigger here. And you have all that stuff. Again, because you don't know how this, orchestra, the symphony that is a movie is going to play until you have all the notes, and so, when I hear people do like one take, I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know how you do that. And I've seen movies by people that do that, and you go like, yeah, that felt like you gave that person one take. It's not fair to the actors unless it's an actor who just nails it the first time and says, I don't want to do it again. And I've worked with those actors on TV where you do 2 takes and you're like, oh, try this. Or like, no, we got it. And it's like, okay, screw me. But you just want them to be able to settle in. I find the first take is is tough anyway because there's all this pressure on a first take, and you're like, okay, everybody get ready and action. Like when I was an actor, that was always like, you tense up. But, in the gift of HD now that we can roll for 30 minutes, you go like, try it again, just go again. Like you get them out of the idea that they're in front of a camera. And not that great actors can't do that anyway. But, the more you get people just kind of not off their game, but out of their heads, then the better performance you get.
Paul, I wonder where you draw your ideas from. One of my favorite films you've done is Spy, which you wrote, directed, produced. A great film. And I think it's probably the first time you did all those things since Freaks and Geeks, right? At that point, I think 2015 when that film came, you really did everything on that film, aside from acting. And clearly you wrote that for Melissa McCarthy, who's just a wonderful actor and just strikes me as an incredibly warm person as well. Tell me where Freaks and Geeks, clearly you were drawing on your experience in high school and your own personal biography. But when you have these ideas or when you want to pursue a new idea, where do you go? I mean, do you go back to Animal Crackers and Marx Brothers? Do you go, to those, those Peter Bogdanovich films from the early 70s? Where do you find inspiration to have something new come out of you?
Well, I get inspired by individual things I see, and I'm very inspired by genres, and I'm really into like trying to do all the genres because I like when there's tropes of a genre that you can then subvert for comedy. That's the Heat. I fell in love with the script for the Heat that Katie Dippold wrote because they go like, I've seen a million buddy cop comedies, but not with two women. And she was so brilliant at just like subverting all those tropes and, turning them on their head. And I'm a giant James Bond fanatic and always for my whole career was like, if I could ever direct a James Bond movie, that'd be the greatest thing that ever happened. But then Casino Royale had come out right when I was doing Unaccompanied Minors. And to me, that was just like, it's still my favorite Bond movie because it's just everything about it was so great and it was so well directed and all that. And so at the time when we were finishing The Heat, Skyfall had come out and I really enjoyed that too. And I'm going like, I want to do one. They're not going to hire me. So wait, I work with all these funny women. Why don't I just develop my own for a woman? But then I can put a personal story in it. And the personal story for me was when I was doing The Heat, I'd done Bridesmaids and Judd was a producer on it. And we'd done Freaks and Geeks together. So I kind of got used to working with Judd. And I was so nervous when I was on The Heat because he wasn't a producer on it. And I was kind of on my own, basically. And I had all this angst of like, can I do it? And I really tortured myself during the first, lead up to the movie and that's sort of the first few weeks and then kind of found my footing and I was very confident after that. And so I thought, okay, well, I want to have this character, who's kind of this not confident person. So I really just based it all on how I felt of like, somebody who has the ability, but is so like not confident and so used to being behind somebody else who is more famous than them. And that was really the genesis of it and why it resonated with me emotionally because that was her journey of like, she thinks Fine, she does all the stuff for Bradley Fine behind the scenes. It's kind of the, brains for him. But then when she has to go out on her own, she has to find the confidence and, and does it. So, long-winded way of saying, no matter what genre I do and what kind of story I do, I want to make sure it's a commercial idea, something that feels like an audience will want to see. But then I got to figure out what's the small character-driven story that really resonates with me, which is what is their insecurity. Every movie I do, everything, you'll notice it's all about like an underachiever, an underdog who doesn't know their place in the world and has no confidence. Like that to me is every movie I've ever done because I feel everybody is, and that's me still to this day.
Would you say that when you conceive of an idea now, because you just mentioned it, I wonder how important, how much does the end user, the end consumer, the audience factor into how you think about what you're going to do? Because I relate to that. Mm-hmm. With this show, with the other shows I do, I always think, is this worth a listener's time? Totally. Is this going to be a good use of their time? And if not, it's not worth pursuing this idea.
Totally.
That's really how I approach it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's if you don't think that way and you're in the entertainment business, then you should get out of the business, because obviously you can't do something good if it doesn't mean something to you. But you then have to run that through the filter of, but does anybody else want to see it? And, in our company, we always say, I was saying, like, what's an undeniable idea? What do you see the trailer for? And you go, I got to see that, and I always judge any idea like, okay, if I saw this and I didn't know it was me, would I want to see this movie? And it's a sobering litmus test to give yourself, but you have to do it because, again, going back to why I said don't make movies to win awards, because, the critics are fickle. You're either going to get them or you're not. But if you don't entertain that audience and they don't have the time of their lives, even if it's dark, something, scary, dramatic, whatever it is, but they don't walk out going like, that was really, I had a great time watching that, then you've failed, and you shouldn't be doing it as far as I'm concerned, because we do what we do to entertain people, and what you're doing is you're entertaining them and informing them and all that. I'm trying to entertain them through making them laugh, but also burying the medicine in there of like, here's some, things to think about, hopefully about just the human condition and finding your confidence and kind of being, having empathy for other people but yeah, entertain first and foremost.
It strikes me that your latest project is, it does many of those things, which is, I've seen the trailer for it, The School for Good and Evil. It's more or less, it's about where fairy tales, the origins of fairy tales, right? The school where fairy tales are kind of born. And it's like, it has like sort of Harry Potter-esque, Game of Thrones-esque sets. It's a big film. This is a big departure for you, right? Imagine. Is it? Would you say this is the biggest project that you've ever done?
Yeah, Ghostbusters was
sort of on scale in terms of scale.
Ghostbusters was big, but this is bigger because we got to invent a world, and that was one of my dreams. Was always like, if I could do something where I could just invent a world from the bottom up, that would be exciting visually, And but honestly, this movie isn't that much different than any other movie I've made because it's about female friendship, and it's about these, two young women who are friends, and one's very unsatisfied with her life, and the other, is just trying to support her friend, and they get pulled into this crazy situation that turns everything on its head because they get dropped in the opposite places that they thought they're going to get dropped, and have to confront who they really are. And save their friendship. And so, it's not that far off from Freaks and Geeks and all these other things. It just has these gigantic trappings of magic and enormous sets and these beautiful costumes that we made from scratch. And, but it's right when you see it, it's pretty much in my oeuvre, if you will, if I can use such a horrible word.
Paul, how do you cope with the uncertainty? You've had so many successes, and they've been hard won because you've also had moments in your career where you didn't have those successes, or films weren't critically acclaimed, or audiences didn't find them, like the film about the boy in Eastern Europe, for example. But I wonder, Ghostbusters there were mixed reviews. It did well at the box office, but there was controversy around it. It had mixed reviews. You've also had films that have been huge successes, like Bridesmaids and Spy and The Heat and others. How do you now that where you are in life, where you are in your career, with all the things you've kind of been through, how do you manage the sort of the ups and downs, or the criticism, for example, or the potential for a film not doing well? Even this new film, which you may love, it could be huge. It could be the biggest thing you ever did, and it could also not be. Oh, yeah. So how do you kind of manage that now? Do you still have sleepless nights? Do you still get nervous about it?
I don't sleep. I sleep 4 to 5 hours a night. That's about it. No, it never goes away. And it's so funny. So many people go like, well, you must feel much better now. Like you must not worry anymore. And it's like, I worry more now than I did back then because first of all, you're afraid not to worry because the minute you get overconfident, like we talked about before, that's bad. But it's just, you do what you do. you be as hard as you can on it. We do test screenings, so we try to at least find out what real people want, because I don't have any confidence, and I shouldn't, to go like, let's just put it together and whatever we came up with in the editing room, I'm sure people will love. So, we do enough research to make sure that people like it, but then you just don't know. And I'm not great with criticism. I don't enjoy it at all. I over the years have gone like, okay, try not to believe the good reviews or the bad ones. Just kind of, they are what they are. But you do still go like, oh, that's a good review. And then when you get a bad review, it's like, screw you. You don't know what you're talking about. But so I don't think it ever changes. I don't think you ever lose that fear, that going back to what we had said earlier. And I don't think your confidence ever goes up, except when you're about to blow it. The minute you get like, now I got it, man, I'm going to crush this. I just think it all goes pear-shaped, because you stop listening to people and you stop listening to the voice in your head that goes like, let's be a little harder on this. I think we can top this. Let's just think about this a little bit more. Let's get somebody else's opinion on this. Or even when you're on the set, like, if somebody goes like, I'm having a hard time with this line, you'll go, well, I spent 3 years writing it, so you just say it that way. It's like, no, come on, let's figure out what's the best way to say it. How would you say it? And then you go, that's way better. And they're like, oh, but try this, in a collaboration that way. So it's just really, you never get confident. You never stop worrying. It just gets worse and worse. You just get older and more gray hair.
But that at this point in your career, you have this body of work that you can also lean on and say, you know what, there's some great work there.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean anything going forward. It means very little going forward, because here's the thing I've discovered in Hollywood is they're always waiting for you to lose your mind. They're always waiting for you to pull a fast one on them. So this feeling like, well, he's all these commercial movies, but this is probably the one he thinks is his art movie, and he's going to try to sneak something past us that's not commercial. And all I'm going is like, guys, I don't want to do that movie. Trust me, I did it, and it didn't work. So I just want to make you as much money as I can, or get you the most minutes watched, or whatever the litmus test is for success. I have the benefit of being somebody that people do like to work with, because I try not to be a jerk, and I'm very collaborative and like working with people, but I do dig in. I will dig in at the moments when I see disaster coming, or when I just go like, that opinion isn't right. Let me try to find a way to solve it for you. But what you want, I know it's not right, because I've seen it not work, or we tried it before in a test screen, it didn't work. Or I just know this song is going to work. There's certain things I can dig in on because I've seen them work, or I just know. There's a few things you just go like, I just know this is right. There's certain jokes I've written. There's one in this movie that Michelle Yeoh has that I just wrote it. It was for we shot some extra scenes for the movie. And I was just like, I think the audience will just love it if she says this right now. And it just gets it's like the biggest laugh in the movie. And so those are the moments just come from experience and going like, I know that I've got this pressure cooker on this audience. And if I just put this one release valve in, they're going to go nuts for this one moment. So those are the moments you go like, oh, I kind of know what I'm doing. But then, it's 90% going like, oh, that was wrong. Or, oh shit, I should have made that better. So yeah, just again, be confident enough to not have any confidence.
Paul, before I let you go, you have this new project just out. And so I hesitate to ask you this question, because I hate when people ask me this question, but it's still an important question to ask, which is, what are the things that you want, that are left for you to do? I mean, there's so many things, but I mean, now you've just released a fantasy, adventure film. Where else do you want to explore?
I want to make a big musical. I want to make a big sci-fi epic. I want to make a Western. I want to make a horror movie. I want more thrillers. No, it's endless, really. I mean, there's so many things I want to do. And that's why I think I love movies so much, because you don't get stranded in one, I mean, you can get, obviously, look, I'm kind of hoping we get to make more movies, more in this franchise, because it's a very franchisable movie, The School for Good and Evil. But there's all these other things that we're developing and have in the works that you just get excited about, because you don't get stranded in the middle of, like, that's why I think drove me out of television, like wanting to do TV full time, because the idea of like, a TV show is something you want to go forever. And it's like, I know I got to have the end so I can then go to something different. And I just like to do different stuff. So anything that I haven't done before is the most exciting thing in the world for me. And that's what I'm always going to look for.
That was my conversation with director Paul Feig. We're going to link to some of the videos that we mentioned in this episode at our website. Go to thegreatcreators.com/Feig. And we publish show notes for all of our episodes at thegreatcreators.com. And if you want to see more episodes like this on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button below this video. And if you want to find out when we post new videos, just hit the bell button and you will be notified. Thank you so much for watching and listening to The Great Creators. I'm Guy Raz. I will see you next time.